I was standing at the church doors, clutching a wrapped gift in my hands so tightly that the paper had started to crease beneath my fingers. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. No, it was beating the way it does when a mother finally sees the moment she has waited for. Her son, dressed in his suit, standing tall, about to start his own family. I told myself, this is it. This is the reward for every sleepless night, every meal skipped so he could eat, every hour I worked when my body was breaking. But then she turned, my daughter-in-law, the bride, standing there in her perfect white dress, surrounded by bridesmaids and laughter that wasn't meant for me. She smiled, but it wasn't the smile of joy. No, it was sharp, cold, final. "You are not invited," she said, her voice calm but cruel, like she had practiced it in a mirror. The ushers froze, unsure what to do. Guests turned their heads, whispering. Some gasped, some smirked, as if they had known this would happen. And I stood there like a shadow, humiliated at the very doorway of the church where I thought my place had been saved. I turned to my son, my boy, the one I carried, fed, clothed, and prayed over every single night. I waited for him to stand up, to take my hand and tell her she was wrong, to tell the world that I was his mother, and no one, not even a bride in a white gown, could erase that. But he didn't. He lowered his eyes, his jaw clenched, and in the smallest, weakest voice, he muttered words that shattered me more than her rejection ever could. "Mom, maybe you should leave. Don't make a scene." The gift slipped in my hands. My throat tightened until I could barely breathe. My son, my own blood, chose silence over me. Tell me, what would you have done if the person you loved most in the world allowed you to be cast aside like trash? Would you have fought for your place? Or would you have swallowed your pride, turned your back, and walked away? I walked away that day. I walked away with tears burning down my cheeks, while their laughter rang behind me. I walked away with shame clinging to my shoulders like a heavy coat. And I told myself that maybe if I kept silent, I would still find a way back into his heart. But silence is a strange thing. It doesn't heal. It doesn't protect. It lingers, like a wound that festers in the dark. And as I stood outside that church, staring at the building where I had been shut out of my own son's happiness, something inside me shifted. A fire I thought had long died sparked awake in my chest. That day, my daughter-in-law thought she had won. That day, she believed her smug little smile had cut me down for good. But what she didn't know, what my son didn't know, was that every wound leaves a scar, and every scar carries a story. And my story was only beginning. So listen carefully, child, because what came next would silence that smile forever. That was the day my daughter-in-law thought she won, but she had no idea what was coming. Do you know what betrayal feels like, child? Not the kind you read in books or watch in films. I mean the kind that cracks open your chest, scoops out your heart, and leaves you standing there, hollow, while the world watches. That was me, standing at the entrance of that church, clutching my little box wrapped in blue paper. Inside it was something I thought my son and his bride would treasure forever. My mother's bracelet, a small piece of family history, handed down from woman to woman, through hardship and hunger, through sickness and survival. I had saved it for this day, for her. I thought I was welcoming her into the family, but instead, "You are not invited." The words still ring in my ears. I can hear them exactly as she said them, her lips curled, her eyes bright with pride. There wasn't a stutter, not a single flinch of guilt. She meant it. She had planned it. I glanced at the ushers, boys in stiff suits, hands folded in front of them, unsure whether to look at me or at her. One of them shifted, as though he might step aside and let me in, but she didn't even look at him. She lifted her chin, a silent command, and he froze. Behind her, the bridesmaids exchanged glances. One smirked, another raised her brows like she pitied me. And then the whispers began. That's his mother? She wasn't even invited? Didn't she raise him? Each word struck me harder than the one before. The walls of that church, meant for prayer and blessings, felt like they were closing in on me. I turned to the one person who could stop it all. My son. He stood near the altar, adjusting his tie, trying to look composed. When he finally lifted his eyes to mine, I knew. I knew before he spoke. He was already lost to her. Mom, he muttered, not loud enough for many to hear, but enough for me. Maybe you should leave. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene. Those words, they broke me. After everything, after raising him on my back, he was worried about a scene? Not about his mother standing outside like a beggar? Not about the woman who birthed him being shamed before strangers? No. He was worried about embarrassment. The gift trembled in my hands. My palms were sweating, and for a moment I thought I might drop it. My throat burned as though I had swallowed fire, and my knees felt weak. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march down that aisle, drag him out by the collar, and remind him who had carried him when he was too sick to walk, who had sat up nights sewing his uniforms by candlelight, who had prayed for him when no one else believed he would pass his exams. But I didn't. I swallowed it. I swallowed the rage, the hurt, the shame, because I realized something. No one there would defend me. Not him, not the ushers, not the guests. I was alone, and so I turned. The church doors were still open behind me, the sunlight spilling in across the floor, like God himself was trying to pull me out before I drowned. I walked through them, slow at first, then faster, until the murmurs faded behind me. Outside, the air was too bright, too hot. I clutched the bracelet box tighter and kept walking. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the ground wanted to pull me under. I don't remember how far I walked before the tears came. Maybe 10 steps, maybe 20. But when they did, I couldn't stop them. They rolled down my face, hot and endless, blurring the street and the flowers tied to the church fence. I found a bench near the gates and sat. My hands were shaking so hard that the gift nearly fell again. And that was when the shame fully hit me. Do you know what it feels like to sit outside your own child's wedding like an outcast? To hear the bells ringing, the guests cheering, the choir singing hymns of love and blessing, and to know none of it includes you? I pressed my fist to my mouth to keep from sobbing too loudly. A few people passed by, giving me curious looks. One woman stopped and asked if I was all right, but I waved her off. What could I say? That my son had chosen his bride's cruelty over his mother's love? That I had been erased in the space of a single sentence? No. I sat there and let the shame eat me alive. Inside the church, they said their vows. They exchanged rings. They kissed to the applause of the guests. And outside, I sat on a splintered bench, clutching a bracelet no one wanted, trying not to collapse. The sound of the church doors opening again jolted me. Guests began pouring out, laughing, chatting, holding up their phones to take pictures of the new couple. I lowered my head, hoping no one would notice me. But they did. Oh, they did. Isn't that his mother? Someone whispered as they passed. She's still here, another muttered. And then the bride and groom emerged. She looked radiant, triumphant, like a queen who had crushed her enemy. Her hand was wrapped tightly around my son's arm. And him? He didn't even glance my way. Not once. They walked past me as though I were a stranger, as though I were invisible. That was the moment the last piece of me broke. Not when she barred me from entering, not when the guests whispered, not even when he told me to leave. No, the final blow came when he walked past his own mother, who sat crying on a bench and pretended she wasn't there. I thought I would die from the weight of it, but instead, I lived. And in that moment, something inside me changed. I had spent my whole life bending, breaking, sacrificing for him. And in return, he allowed me to be discarded. The wedding doors shut that day, not just the wooden ones at the church. No, the doors in my heart shut too. And once a mother's heart closes, nothing can open it the same way again. Do you know what silence can do, child? Words can cut, yes, but silence. Silence is a slow poison. It doesn't strike all at once. It lingers. It spreads. It eats away until there's nothing left. That was the silence my son gave me. When the church bells rang and the guests clapped, when laughter rose like smoke into the sky, I sat outside, small and forgotten, with that little box still in my hands. I wanted more than anything to hear his voice again, not the muttered dismissal he gave me at the door, but the voice of the boy I raised, the boy who used to call out "Mama" the moment he walked in from school, the boy who once ran into my arms after every scraped knee. But he never came. I heard the cheer as the priest announced them husband and wife. I heard the applause as they kissed. I heard the music as the choir sang Ave Maria. So beautifully it made my chest ache. And all the while I waited. I waited for my son to come out and find me, to take my hand and say, "Mama, I'm sorry, come inside." But he never did. When the doors finally opened, she was the first I saw. My daughter-in-law, her veil lifted, her lipstick perfect, her eyes glittering like she had conquered the world. She didn't look tired. She didn't look shy. No, she looked victorious. That smile she gave me was the same one she had given at the doors, sharp, cruel, certain. She didn't need to say another word. That smile told me everything. You don't belong here. You never will. And then came my son. Oh, child, it's one thing to be hated by a stranger, but it's another to be abandoned by your own blood. He walked beside her, tall, proud, looking straight ahead as though nothing had happened, as though his mother hadn't been thrown out of his wedding like a beggar. He didn't look at me, not once, not even a flicker of recognition. Do you know how much courage it took for me to sit still as they passed? My whole body was screaming, shaking, wanting to rise and shout his name, to grab his arm, to remind him who I was. But I didn't move. I stayed frozen, as though the bench itself had swallowed me, because I realized something at that moment. He had made his choice. The crowd erupted in joy. Guests threw handfuls of rice. Phones flashed as they took pictures of the smiling couple. Music swelled, and there I sat, clutching my little gift tighter, drowning in the noise of celebration that had no place for me. Her smile, his silence. It was worse than any curse, worse than being slapped across the face. Because when someone curses you, they at least acknowledge you exist. But when your own child treats you like a ghost, that is a death no one can see. But you feel it in every bone. I thought back to all the times I had stood for him when no one else did, how I had defended him when neighbors called him reckless, how I had shielded him from gossip, sacrificed meals so he could eat, bent my back so he could walk tall. And now, when it was my turn to need his strength, he gave me nothing. That silence was louder than the church bells, louder than the laughter, louder than the music, and it stayed with me long after they drove away in their decorated car, leaving me behind like the dirt on the ground. When the last guest had gone, when the last rice grains had scattered on the pavement, when the last hymn had faded into the evening air, I was still there, sitting, waiting, holding that little box like it was the last piece of my dignity. But no one came for me. Not my son. Not even a curious friend of the family. The silence had swallowed me whole. And in that silence, something hardened inside me. Betrayal doesn't always make you scream. Sometimes it makes you quiet. So quiet you begin to hear your own thoughts clearly. And mine whispered to me, "They think you are nothing. Prove them wrong." Her smile cut me. His silence killed me. But pain has a way of becoming strength. They had no idea what seed they planted that day. When I finally returned home that night, the house was dark. Not the kind of dark you cure with a switch, but the kind that settles in your bones. I sat at the edge of my bed and opened the box I'd carried all day. The paper was wrinkled now, the ribbon crushed. My hands trembled as I pulled it apart. Inside was a simple dress, ivory with lace on the sleeves. Not expensive, not modern, but it was mine, my wedding dress. I had folded it carefully the night before, thinking it would mean something to her, to pass it down, mother to daughter, a symbol that though I had little, I still had love to give. I thought she might hold it and see me as more than just his mother. I thought she might honor me with a smile, maybe even a thank you. But I never got the chance to place it in her hands. So there it was again, in mine. A relic of a life that seemed so far away, yet still clung to me like a second skin. And as I stared at that dress, the memories began to bleed through one after another. I remembered the night I sewed the hem with candlelight flickering on the walls. We had no electricity then, no money for a seamstress. My fingers bled as I worked, but I told myself, it will be beautiful. It will be enough. I remembered my wedding day, the way the church smelled of lilies even though we could barely afford flowers, the way my husband's hand shook when he slid the ring onto my finger, the way my heart believed foolishly that joy would last forever. But joy is a fragile guest. It doesn't stay long. Not long after, my husband left this world too soon, and the dress was packed away. I became mother and father in one body. And every time I looked at that dress, I told myself it was proof. Proof I had known happiness once, and proof that I could give that same happiness to my son. Oh, child, do you know what sacrifice looks like in small details? It looks like a mother patching the same school uniform over and over until the fabric itself gives way. It looks like cooking one pot of soup and eating only the broth so your son can have the meat. It looks like waiting at bus stops in the rain because the last coins in your purse belong to your child's textbooks. And when he slept, I would take out this very dress, unfold it across my lap, and whisper promises into its lace. You will stand tall. You will be loved. You will have more than I ever had. That dress became my vow, a vow stitched into every thread. So when I tried to hand it to her, I wasn't offering fabric. I was offering my years, my sacrifice, my story, and she threw it away before she even touched it. I clutched that dress to my chest, and for the first time in years, I cried like a child, not the silent tears that slipped down in the night. No, this was the kind that shook the body, the kind that leaves you empty afterward. Because it wasn't just the rejection of the gift. It was the rejection of me, of everything I had poured into this life. And as the moonlight crept through the window, I realized something I'd never wanted to admit. My sacrifices had raised a man, but not a son. The dress in my hands felt heavier than ever, not because of the fabric, but because of the truth it carried. Shame doesn't scream, child. It whispers. As I stood frozen at the church doors, the gift box still clutched in my hands, I heard them before I even saw their faces. The guests, old neighbors, distant relatives, friends of the bride's family, their voices carried across the aisle like daggers wrapped in silk. Is that his mother? One woman asked in a low tone that wasn't low enough. I heard she was difficult, another replied, her eyes sliding toward me as if I couldn't see. No wonder they don't want her here, came a man's chuckle, sharp enough to pierce bone. They didn't speak to me. They spoke about me, as though I were some shameful stain that had appeared uninvited on their perfect wedding day. I wanted to vanish, to melt into the stone floor beneath my feet. But I stood still, my hands trembling, my heart pounding louder than the church organ that played somewhere deep inside. I turned toward my son, my only son. He could have stopped it all with a single word. He could have silenced their gossip with a glance, lifted me into that aisle with pride, but instead, he looked away. His bride's hand tightened on his arm, and together they walked toward the altar as if I were nothing more than a stranger blocking the doorway. Do you know what it feels like to be invisible in a room full of people? It feels like drowning, but no one sees you struggle. It feels like being buried alive, but the world keeps clapping as if it's a celebration. It feels like love, decades of love, evaporating in a single breath. The whispers grew louder, not because the words were sharper, but because I could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on me. Some pitied me, some enjoyed the spectacle, and others judged me as if I were guilty of something they didn't even know. I wanted to shout, to scream, to tell them all the truth, that I had raised him alone when his father died, that I had stitched his clothes when we couldn't afford new ones, that I had gone hungry so his plate would always be full, that every wrinkle on my face was carved by nights spent worrying, working, and praying for him. But who would listen? The aisle wasn't for mothers like me. It was for brides and grooms, for beauty and celebration, not for a woman standing with tears in her eyes and a box clutched like a lifeline. I swallowed my words, each one burning my throat like fire. And then I heard laughter, not the joyful laughter of a wedding, but the cruel kind, the kind people use when they think they're above you. A group of young women, bridesmaids in soft pink, giggled as they passed. One whispered loudly, "Imagine being unwanted at your own son's wedding." Unwanted. The word struck deeper than any insult. It echoed in my chest, bouncing against every sacrifice I had made, until it finally cracked something inside me. I turned to leave. My steps were slow, heavy, each one dragging my shame behind me like a shadow that would never let go. The church doors closed softly behind me, but in my mind it was the sound of a coffin sealing shut. Out there, on the steps, I let the cold air hit my face. I thought of running, of never looking back. But shame has a way of following you, child. It doesn't care how far you go. It clings. And as I stood alone, the whispers still ringing in my ears, I realized something. Shame wasn't my prison. It was their weapon. They wanted me silent, small, erased. And for the first time that day, I wondered, what if I didn't stay erased? That night, as I replayed every whisper, every laugh, every glance, a seed began to grow inside me. Not of forgiveness, not of surrender, but of something far more dangerous. I didn't go home right away. The church bells rang behind me, loud and clear, announcing their vows inside, promises of forever, spoken under chandeliers and surrounded by flowers. But outside, on the stone steps where I stood, another vow was forming, one the guests would never hear, one my son would never expect. The air was cold, biting against my cheeks, but I barely felt it. My hands still held the box with the dress inside, crumpled ribbon hanging loose. It felt heavier than ever, as though it carried not just fabric, but every sacrifice, every year of my life that had led me here. I lowered myself onto the edge of the steps. My back ached, my knees stiff, but I didn't care. For the first time that day, I allowed myself to sit in the silence. Pain does strange things when it lingers too long. At first, it broke me. I cried until my body trembled, until no sound would come out. But as I sat there, with the wedding music muffled through the closed doors, my tears began to dry. And where the tears ended, Something harder took root. Do you know what that feels like? It's like holding a blade that once cut you and realizing it can cut others too. It's like tasting ash in your mouth and deciding never to burn that way again. It's like standing outside your own son's wedding and whispering to yourself, never again will they make me small. I clenched the box tighter against my chest and made my vow. I will not forget this day, I whispered to the empty street, and I will not forgive it. It wasn't a vow for anger's sake. It wasn't reckless. It was quiet, deliberate, and sharp. They had turned me into a shadow, erased me from their picture of a perfect life. But shadows, child, they don't disappear. They wait, they stretch, and when the light fades, they're all that's left. I didn't vow to scream at them. I didn't vow to beg for my place back. No, I vowed to wait, to watch, and to let the truth come crawling to the surface. Because the truth always does. Lies glitter like gold for a time, but gold paint peels, and when it peels, the world sees the rust beneath. I lifted my eyes toward the church doors one last time. Behind them, my son was smiling, his bride was glowing, and the guests were cheering. They thought I was gone, forgotten, defeated. But as I stood and gathered my strength, I knew something they didn't. They had written me out of their story, but they had no idea I was about to write the ending. I walked away from those steps slowly, each stride steadier than the last. With every step, I shed a little of the shame they had thrown on me, like a cloak sliding off my shoulders. And in its place, steel, quiet steel. They thought the vows spoken inside were the only ones that mattered. But the vow I made outside that church would outlive theirs, and it would cost them everything. I didn't speak of the wedding for days. I sat in my small kitchen, curtains drawn, the unopened gift box still sitting on the table. I couldn't bring myself to move it. It felt like moving it would make the shame more real. Silence filled the room like smoke, and in that silence, I replayed every word, every glance, every moment. Then one morning, the phone rang. It was Marlene, an old friend of mine from church. We had known each other since our children were in grade school. Her voice had the same warmth it always carried, but that morning there was something else in it too. Hesitation. She asked me to meet her at the diner off Main Street, the one with the chipped booths and strong coffee. I went, though I wasn't sure if I was ready to face anyone. When I walked in, she was already there, waving me over. Her smile was kind, but her eyes studied me carefully, like she was searching for the right words. "You don't deserve what happened," she said softly after the waitress poured our coffee. "Everyone saw it. Everyone's been talking." Her words stung, but I forced myself to nod. I had lived through gossip before, but then she leaned closer, her voice dropping, and my chest tightened. They're not as perfect as they looked that day," she whispered. "People are saying the bride, well, she's been hiding things, money things, debt, a past she didn't want anyone to know about." I froze, my spoon clinking against the cup. Marlene's eyes darted to the side as though the walls might hear her. "Her family in Kentucky, there's trouble there, and your son, he's blind to it. Or maybe he doesn't want to see." For a moment, I didn't breathe. The humiliation at the church had burned me, but this was different. This wasn't just a slight. This was a crack in the foundation they had tried to build on my back. I leaned back slowly, the bitterness of the coffee coating my tongue. The chatter of the diner faded until all I could hear was Marlene's voice and the pounding of my own heart. Do you know that feeling when someone hands you a piece of information so sharp it cuts through your grief? When anger twists into something else, into purpose? I thanked Marlene quietly, my hands trembling as I folded the napkin on the table. She reached across and squeezed my hand. "Be careful," she said. "Secrets like that, they don't stay buried, and when they come out, they take people down with them." I walked out of that diner with the sun on my face, but inside the shadows grew deeper. If what Marlene said was true, my daughter-in-law had built her perfect smile on a lie. And lies, child, have a way of crumbling. Her words played over and over in my mind, and the more I thought of them, the more I realized my daughter-in-law wasn't the only one keeping secrets. My son was too. Marlene's words lingered in my chest like an ember that refused to go out. I tried to tell myself she was wrong, that maybe the gossip was nothing more than people hungry for drama. But deep inside, I knew better. Where there is smoke, there is fire. Weeks passed before the ember grew into flame. My son called one Sunday afternoon. His voice hurried, distracted. He wanted me to pick up a box of his old things from his apartment. They were moving to a bigger place, he said, and they didn't want clutter. At first, I almost said no. My pride still carried the bruise of that day at the church, but something inside urged me forward. Maybe it was the mother in me. Maybe it was the vow I made outside those church doors. So I went. The apartment was quiet when I arrived. They had already left for a showing with their realtor. The neighbor had the spare key and handed it to me with a polite nod. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. That's when I saw it, a folder on the kitchen counter, left out, as though someone had been rifling through it in a hurry. My first instinct was to turn away, to leave it untouched. But then Marlene's voice echoed in my head. She's been hiding things, money things. My hand trembled as I reached for it. Inside the folder were papers, bank statements, credit card bills, letters from collectors stamped with red warnings, past due, final notice. The numbers were staggering, tens of thousands of dollars, names I didn't recognize, accounts linked not just to her, but to my son. My throat tightened as I flipped through each page, and then I found the contract, a signed loan agreement with his name scrawled at the bottom, my boy's name, binding him to her debts. I sank into a chair, the weight of it pressing on my chest. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't rumor. This was the truth written in black ink. But the worst part wasn't the money. It wasn't even the lies she had told him. It was the letter tucked at the back of the folder, a message from a man whose name I had never heard. The words were short, but sharp enough to wound. You can't keep hiding me forever. He deserves to know the truth. I read it twice, then a third time, my vision blurring with hot tears. My daughter-in-law's secrets weren't only about money. There was someone else, another betrayal. Do you understand now the pain of watching your son throw his future into the hands of someone who smiles sweetly in public but keeps poison in private? It is the kind of pain that steals your breath and fills your veins with fire. I closed the folder and pressed it to my chest, my heart pounding so loud I thought the walls might hear. I knew then that the day at the church was not the end. It was the beginning. I thought I had seen betrayal at the wedding doors, but compared to what I held in my hands that day, the real betrayal hadn't even begun. I held the folder for days before I found the courage to act. It sat on my table like a silent witness, daring me to speak, to do something. Each time I passed it, my chest tightened. I wasn't ready to destroy my son's happiness, not yet. I needed to be sure, so I called him. "Come by for dinner," I said softly, trying to make my voice sound normal, motherly, as though nothing heavy was pressing on me. He agreed, but his tone was distracted. When he arrived, he looked different. Clean suit, polished shoes, the scent of perfume that wasn't his. We sat at the table. I cooked his favorite meal, the same dish I used to make when he was a boy after school. He ate absent-mindedly, scrolling through his phone between bites. The little boy who once held my hand across the street had grown into a man who barely looked up from a screen. I cleared my throat. "Son, do you trust her?" He paused, fork halfway to his lips. "Who?" "Your wife," I whispered. He gave a short laugh. Not warm, not loving, cold. Of course I do, Mom. Why wouldn't I? I wanted to scream, to throw the folder on the table to make him see the truth staring in ink. But instead, I tried again, gentler. Sometimes love can blind us. Sometimes we don't see what's right in front of us. His eyes narrowed. What are you trying to say? I searched his face, looking for the boy I raised, the boy who once believed every word I spoke. I've heard things about debts, about people she owes, about secrets. That's when he laughed. Not kindly, not even nervously. It was a laugh sharp enough to slice through me. Mom, he said, shaking his head, you listen too much to gossip. You've been bitter since the wedding. Don't drag her into your fantasies. My heart dropped into my stomach. Bitter. That's what he thought of me now. After everything. After years of sacrifice. He looked at me as if I were the enemy, not the woman who carried him into this world. I tried once more, my voice trembling. I'm telling you this because I love you, because I don't want to see you hurt. Please, look closely at her. You'll see what I mean. But he leaned back in his chair and smiled a smile I didn't recognize. It wasn't the smile of my son. It was hers, cold, mocking, untouchable. Mom, maybe you should stop meddling. If you keep this up, you won't have a place in my life at all. The words stabbed sharper than the laugh. I stared at him, unable to breathe, unable to believe. The boy who once cried in my arms now laughed at my warnings. The man I raised now threatened to erase me with a sentence. And in that laugh, I realized my son was no longer mine. After that night at my table, I stopped trying to convince him with words. Words had raised him. Words had taught him right from wrong. But words had failed me. He no longer heard my voice as a mother's truth. He only heard it as noise. So I decided to stop speaking. Instead, I began to move quietly, one small step at a time. You see, lies are fragile things. They don't need to be smashed to break. They only need a crack, and once the crack shows, the whole wall starts to fall. The first thing I did was simple. I returned the folder of documents to where I had found it. I didn't take a single page. I didn't copy a thing. I wanted her to think her secrets were still hidden. But what I carried was not paper. It was knowledge. And knowledge is heavier than any stone. The second thing I did was listen. At the market, at church, on the phone with old friends. I let people talk, and when they asked me questions, I gave small, careful answers. Nothing too direct, nothing too strong, just enough to leave a shadow in their minds. Oh, she's beautiful, yes, I'd say about my daughter-in-law. Then I would pause, just long enough to make them curious. But beauty does not always pay debts. I didn't accuse. I didn't explain. I simply let their imaginations do the rest. And soon, whispers began to move faster than I ever could. Whispers about loans unpaid. Whispers about favors called in. Whispers about cracks in her perfect white smile. At first, they were soft, almost invisible. But whispers have a way of growing when fed. And I was feeding them carefully, quietly, every day. The third thing I did was harder. I stayed close enough to watch, but far enough to be invisible. I attended gatherings where I knew she would be. I greeted her with a smile that looked harmless, grandmotherly, but I watched how her eyes darted when certain names were mentioned. I noticed the way her hand tightened around her glass when someone brought up money. Every twitch, every glance, every slip of her face, I stored it like gold. And when I was ready, I placed the first real stone. A phone call. Not from me, from a friend. Someone she owed. Someone who had waited too long. Someone who wanted answers. The call wasn't loud. It wasn't public. But it rattled her. And once rattled, she started making mistakes. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to storm into their home with accusations. No, I only needed to step back and let her lies begin to choke her. I didn't need to fight them. I only needed to let their lies eat them alive. It happened slowly, almost too quietly to notice. That is how ruin always begins. Not with a scream, but with a whisper. The first sign came at church. She walked in the way she always did, dressed like a queen, chin high, her hand looped around my son's arm. The pews usually bent toward her like flowers to the sun. But that morning, I saw the difference. People still greeted her, yes, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. Their words hung short, clipped, uncertain. I watched as she leaned in to greet one of the women from the choir. That woman only nodded, then stepped aside as if her perfume were too strong. It was small, almost invisible. But I caught it. The second sign came at the market. The vendor she always bought her imported fruit from gave her a basket, but demanded payment up front. I knew that vendor. I knew she always allowed my daughter-in-law to buy on credit, laughing, calling her a woman of means. But that day, the vendor's smile was gone. Cash only, she said flatly. No more promises. And I saw it then, the flicker in my daughter-in-law's eyes, the smile that almost cracked, the hand that trembled as she dug into her purse, stalling. She paid, but she paid in smaller notes, counting twice, as if the money was not as easy as it used to be. The third sign was the one that told me the trap had sprung. It came during one of their weekend gatherings. They had invited friends over, as always, to boast, to laugh, to show off the new life they thought they had built. She wore her diamonds, he showed his car keys, and they poured champagne into tall glasses. But when a neighbor asked about a loan, innocently in passing, the room grew heavy. My daughter-in-law laughed too loudly, waved her hand too quickly as though brushing away dust. Loans? Oh no, we don't borrow. We invest. But her eyes betrayed her, and in that moment, in front of all her friends, a silence lingered. A silence long enough for the seed of doubt to root itself in their minds. I sat at the corner of that room, watching. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I only observed as her mask, so carefully painted, began to crack. And once a mask cracks, child, it can never be made whole again. That night, as the laughter died and whispers replaced it, I knew the first domino had fallen. And once one falls, the rest always follow. When the walls of a house begin to fall, the ones who suffer first are never the ones who built them. It is the innocent, the quiet souls who get buried beneath the rubble. For me, that innocent heart was my grandson. He was only 8, a boy with wide eyes and a laugh that once filled the house like birdsong in spring. I had been the one to rock him to sleep when his mother was too tired, the one to sneak cookies into his tiny hands when she wasn't looking. He was my shadow in the kitchen, my helper in the garden, the child who ran into my arms with no hesitation, whispering, "Grandma, don't ever leave." But the moment the cracks in his parents' lives began to spread, I saw it in his little shoulders. He carried weight that no child should know. He came to me one evening, his school bag dragging behind him. His face was pale, his voice barely a whisper. "Grandma," he said, "why do the kids at school say Dad owes money? Why do they laugh when they talk about Mom's car?" I froze. That was not his burden. That was not his shame. And yet, because of their lies, because of their endless need to parade a life they couldn't afford, the shame had fallen onto him. I pulled him close, kissed his forehead, and told him not to listen. But the questions in his eyes were too heavy, too sharp for his age. He knew something was wrong, even if no one explained it to him. Then came the night I will never forget. The house was loud with arguments, my son's voice rising, my daughter-in-law's sharper still, money, creditors. Names I didn't know shouted like curses. I heard a crash, the breaking of glass, and then a small cry. I ran to his room. There he was, sitting on the floor, knees pulled to his chest, his little hands over his ears. He was trembling, tears streaking his cheeks. He looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw fear. Not of monsters under his bed, not of shadows in the night, but of his own parents. That cut me deeper than any insult ever could, and for the first time since their betrayal, I asked myself, had I gone too far? Was my silence, my quiet hand guiding their ruin, costing this child more than it would ever cost them? Because revenge tastes sweet in the mouth of the one betrayed, but bitter when it touches the lips of the innocent. That night, holding him close as his small body shook, I wondered if my fight for justice had turned into something else, something I could no longer control. Revenge is a strange companion, child. At first, it feels like fire in your veins, giving you strength when you think you have none. It carries you when your heart feels broken. It whispers to you in the dark, telling you that justice will make the pain easier to bear. But what no one tells you is this: revenge takes two. It does not only wound the guilty, it spills over, staining everything it touches. I saw it that night in my grandson's eyes that should have been filled with joy, with play, with the innocence of childhood. Instead, they carried fear, confusion, and a silence that broke me in ways his parents never could. When I went home to my small rented room, I sat in the dark, and for the first time I asked myself if I had chosen the right path. Had my silence been wisdom or cruelty? Had my decision to let their lies eat them alive turned me into something I promised I'd never be? I thought about all the nights I'd worked double shifts, all the meals I had gone without so my son could eat, all the prayers I whispered into the night air, begging God to make him a man of worth, a man of kindness. And yet, there I was, watching him fall deeper into lies, and my grandson paying the price. I whispered to myself, as if speaking to a room of strangers, "Tell me, child, do you think revenge ever truly heals a wound? Or does it only trade one kind of pain for another?" Because in that silence, I understood something that years of sacrifice had not taught me. Revenge might make the guilty kneel, but it does not always lift the betrayed back to their feet. Sometimes it drags us all down together. Still, as I sat there with guilt pressing heavy on my chest, fate reminded me that my story was not finished. Because while my grandson's tears haunted me, another truth was waiting, one that would strike harder than anything before. I thought the cost of revenge was guilt alone, but I was wrong. Fate was not done with me yet. It was not planned for that day. Life rarely tells you when the storm will break. But when it comes, you know, and I knew. The hall was filled with laughter, glasses clinking, music playing. My daughter-in-law was in her element, standing tall in her glittering gown, moving from guest to guest with that same smug smile she had worn since the day she shut the church doors on me. My son trailed behind her, quieter now, his shoulders tighter, his smile thinner. I sat in the back, uninvited but unafraid. My presence drew whispers, yes, but this time I did not shrink. I did not hide. I waited, and then the moment came. A creditor entered the hall. He wasn't dressed like the others. His suit was worn, his shoes scuffed, but his voice carried weight. He walked straight to my daughter-in-law and demanded repayment, loudly, in front of everyone. The room stilled. Her face froze. For the first time, I saw panic flash in her eyes. That was my moment. I stood, my old bones steady, my voice clear. "Shall I help you explain?" I asked, the words slicing through the silence. Every head turned. Every ear listened. I pulled the papers from my bag, the very documents I had kept hidden, the debts, the lies, the contracts signed in secret. I held them up for all to see. This, I said, is the truth behind the diamonds, behind the cars, behind the parties. You wanted me gone because you feared my eyes would see what you tried to hide. Well, look now. Let all of them see. Gasps rippled through the room. Whispers became waves. My daughter-in-law's hands shook as she reached out. But I pulled the papers back, my grip firm. And then I turned to my son. For years, he had lowered his gaze. For years, he had let her voice speak louder than his own. But in that moment, in front of everyone, I saw the flicker. The boy I raised, the boy who once looked at me with pride, struggling to surface. He stepped forward. His voice cracked at first, but it grew stronger. Enough, he said. His words were not to me, not to the crowd. They were to her. No more lies, no more debts, no more pretending. And with that, silence fell. My daughter-in-law's face drained of color. Her mask shattered completely, in front of the very audience she had tried so hard to impress. For the first time, it was not me who stood alone. It was her. In that hall, under the weight of truth, I finally saw fear in her eyes. And when my son stood by me at last, I knew the tide had turned. The silence that followed was heavier than any hymn I had ever heard in a church. It pressed down on the room until even the music died, until the clinking of glasses stopped, until all that remained was the sound of my daughter-in-law's trembling breath. Her face told the story better than my words ever could. The pride that had once lit her eyes was gone, stripped bare in front of everyone she had worked so hard to impress. The guests, who once lined up to greet her with smiles, now pulled back, whispering into each other's ears, pointing at the very woman who thought she had outplayed us all. She reached for my son's hand, desperate now, her voice a fragile plea. Tell them it isn't true. Tell them, please. But he didn't. For the first time, my son did not shield her. His silence was louder than my accusations, sharper than my proof. It was his silence that broke her. The creditors surrounded her like vultures circling, each with their papers, their demands, their dates and amounts she could no longer deny. The gossip spread faster than fire in dry fields. By the time the night was over, her empire of lies had burned to ashes. I should have felt pity. I should have felt some sliver of mercy. But all I felt was the weight of every night she smirked at me, every word she twisted to push me out, every cold glance that made me question my worth as a mother. And as I turned to leave that hall, I heard the last thing I expected from her. A scream. It wasn't anger. It wasn't rage. It was fear, raw, desperate fear. The kind that comes when a person realizes the game they thought they were winning is over, and they've run out of moves. That scream followed me out. The doors. It was the sound of her crown slipping, her throne crumbling, her pride shattering in front of the very people she had once used to humiliate me. Justice had been served. But as I walked into the night, my heart heavy and my steps slow, I knew my story wasn't finished. One truth still remained, waiting to be spoken, and it was the hardest one of all. Her fall was loud, her mask destroyed, but the secret I carried was heavier than any downfall, and soon it had to be revealed. I have lived long enough to know that battles of the heart are heavier than battles of the flesh. I fought mine not with fists or loud voices, but with patience, with silence, and with truth carried close to my chest until the day it needed to be spoken. Do not think I am proud of everything I did. Revenge leaves a bitter taste, even when it is righteous. It tears at you, even when you win. But strength is not about never bending. It is about standing again after life has tried to break you. To you who listen to my story, take this with you. Never let anyone write your worth. Not a spouse, not society, not even your own children. Respect yourself first and demand it from those around you. Love deeply, but do not lose yourself in the name of love. Protect your children, but do not close your eyes to their blindness. Be gentle, but when the time comes to be firm, do not tremble. I once thought silence was a weakness. I was wrong. Silence is a weapon when you know how to hold it. But truth is the blade that cuts through every lie. And now, with my years behind me and fewer days ahead, I do not wish for riches or praise. I wish for peace. I wish for the strength I found through suffering to live on in those who hear me now. So if you take anything from me, let it be this: stand tall, speak the truth, carry yourself with dignity, even when the world tries to strip it away. That is the legacy of strength, and it is yours to claim. You have walked with me through my hurt, my silence, and the strength I found in the middle of betrayal. My story is not only mine, it belongs to every mother cast aside, every parent forgotten, and every heart that still fights to be heard. Do not let betrayal define you. Let wisdom guide you. And if this story has touched your heart, child, then stay with me. Subscribe so you never miss the next truth I share. Like this video if you believe in strength through pain, and share it with someone who needs to hear these words. The world thinks we fade with age, but wisdom does not fade. It grows sharper, stronger, and those who listen will never walk blind. So I leave you with one last question. If the ones you love betray you, will you break or will you rise?